Before you is the Inferno. Painted around the year 1410 by Giovanni da Modena, this immense fresco is a masterpiece of the late Middle Ages, a sprawling, chaotic, and deeply disturbing vision of hell. At first glance, it feels less like a piece of sacred art and more like the cover of a heavy metal album. The sky is pitch black. The landscape is a jagged, claustrophobic cavern of rocks and fire. And everywhere you look, naked human bodies are being subjected to unimaginable torments by a swarm of grotesque, winged demons. But as your eyes adjust to the sheer horror of the image, the true anomaly becomes clear. This painting isn't tucked away in a forgotten ruin. It sits within the Bolognini chapel, inside one of the world's largest churches, the Basilica of San Petronio in Bologna. If you walk through the Piazza Maggiore today, you'll see the basilica's famously unfinished, half-marble facade. But you'll also see something else: heavily armed soldiers and metal detectors. They aren't there to protect a holy relic. They are standing guard to prevent this specific painting from being blown up. To understand why a 600-year-old fresco requires the kind of 24/7 surveillance usually reserved for heads of state, you have to look closer at the chaos. You soon realize this is not a random explosion of violence. It is a meticulously organized system designed to answer one terrifying question. How did the medieval mind actually comprehend the concept of infinite, eternal torment? Art historians and scholars have described this specific fresco as an infernal museum. In the early 15th century, Europe was slowly inching toward the Renaissance, and with that came a growing humanist impulse to categorize, to map out, and to understand the world. Giovanni da Modena took that intellectual rigor and applied it to damnation. If you study the fresco, you will see that the sinners are not just thrown together. They are carefully sorted, curated, and displayed according to the 7 deadly sins. It is a visual taxonomy of vice. The proud, the greedy, the lustful, the wrathful, each group is locked into a specific, horrifying diorama, undergoing a punishment perfectly tailored to their earthly crimes. It was designed to function as a giant, terrifying memory palace for the illiterate faithful. The Catholic Church and the local authorities needed people to understand exactly what behaviors were unacceptable, and so Giovanni painted an encyclopedic cabinet of ethical curiosities. He created a dark mirror of heavenly order, proving that even in the absolute depths of hell, God's structural logic and divine justice remain perfectly intact. And at the absolute center of this structural logic sits the engine of the entire nightmare: Lucifer. If you are used to the romanticized, tragically beautiful depictions of a fallen angel, like we see in later centuries, Giovanni's Lucifer will shock you. He is a gargantuan, monstrous beast, bound by chains in the frozen center of the underworld. He is entirely stripped of his former angelic dignity. But the most horrifying detail is what he is doing. He is continuously grabbing damned souls, crushing them in his massive jaws, and simultaneously excreting them from his lower extremities. It is a grotesque, never-ending loop of digestion and defecation. Where does a nightmare like this come from? To find the source, we have to look back a century earlier, to the great poet Dante Alighieri and his epic, The Divine Comedy. Giovanni da Modena was heavily inspired by Dante's written vision of the Inferno. Dante also envisioned a gigantic, multi-faced Lucifer trapped in ice at the center of hell, chewing on the greatest traitors of history. But Giovanni had a different task than Dante. Dante was writing poetry for the educated elite. Giovanni was painting a wall for the terrified masses. He had to translate Dante's complex moral philosophy into a visual language that would hit a 15th century peasant like a physical blow to the stomach. The giant beast eating and excreting humans wasn't just meant to be gross. It was a profound theological statement. It represented the ultimate futility and cyclical emptiness of sin. To sin was to be reduced to mere matter, caught forever in the mindless, mechanical digestion of evil. But as you look past the giant beast and begin examining the individual sinners suffering in their designated compartments, you notice something that feels incredibly dangerous. Amidst the writhing masses of the damned, lying naked on the jagged rocks, there is a man wearing a very specific piece of headgear. It is the papal tiara. This presents a massive historical tension. In the year 1410, the Catholic Church held absolute, unquestionable power over the souls of Western Europe. To defy the Church was to invite ruin. To paint the Pope, the vicar of Christ on earth, burning in hell, was practically begging to be excommunicated, jailed for heresy, or burned at the stake. So how in the world did a working-class painter in Bologna get away with putting the Holy Father in the Inferno? The answer lies in one of the most bizarre and chaotic periods in European history, the Great Western Schism. Between the years 1378 and 1417, the Catholic Church literally broke in half. Through a series of political disasters and corrupted elections, there wasn't just one pope, there were two, and eventually there were three. You had a pope in Rome, a pope in Avignon, France, and a pope in Pisa. Each of these men claimed to be the one true voice of God on earth, and each of them excommunicated the other two, along with all of their followers. Imagine the psychological terror this inflicted on the average medieval citizen. You were taught your whole life that your salvation depended entirely on following the true pope. But now there were three, all telling you that if you followed the wrong one, you would burn in hell forever. It was an era of intense spiritual anxiety and deep, bitter cynicism toward the clergy. The city of Bologna, and specifically the wealthy merchant who paid for this fresco, Bartolomeo Bolognini, were fiercely political players in this game. By painting a pope in hell, Giovanni da Modena was executing a brilliant piece of plausible deniability. If questioned by authorities, he could simply claim that the figure wasn't the true pope, but rather one of the false anti-popes, or perhaps just a generic metaphor for the corruption of the clergy. But everyone who looked at the wall knew exactly what it meant. It was a vicious political weapon, a painted protest against the immense wealth, hypocrisy, and broken leadership of the Church. It was the 15th century equivalent of a highly illegal, subversive political cartoon, funded by Bolognese elites to make a statement about their own civic independence. The fresco proves that even in the Middle Ages, art was never just about religion. It was about power, legitimacy, and who had the right to control the narrative. Yet, as subversive as the Pope in Hell is, it is not the reason the Bolognini Chapel is guarded by the military today. The true source of the modern tension lies slightly to the left of Lucifer's head. If you look closely at that specific section of the rock face, you will see a figure lying on his back, chained to the stone. A demonic creature with sharp claws is aggressively pulling at him, tormenting him for eternity. Above this figure, written in clear Gothic script, is a name, Muhammad. It is a depiction of the Prophet Muhammad, the founder of Islam. To understand why he is there, we have to once again return to Dante. In the Divine Comedy, Dante places Muhammad in the 8th circle of hell, in the 9th ditch, a place reserved for the sowers of discord and schism. To the medieval Christian worldview, Islam was not seen as an entirely separate, equally valid world religion. It was viewed through the lens of the Crusades as a violent heresy, a deliberate fracturing of the universal Christian truth. Dante, and by extension Giovanni da Modena, viewed Muhammad not as a holy prophet, but as a schismatic, someone who split humanity apart. For over 500 years, this detail sat on the wall in the dim light of the chapel, largely ignored as a relic of medieval geopolitical prejudice. But at the turn of the 21st century, the world fundamentally changed. As global tensions between the West and the Islamic world reached boiling points, images that were once considered historical artifacts suddenly became active, live wires of cultural conflict. In 2002, Italian authorities intercepted communications from an Al-Qaeda-linked terrorist cell. The group had formulated a plot to blow up the Basilica of San Petronio. Their specific stated motivation was the destruction of Giovanni da Modena's fresco, which they viewed as an intolerable, unforgivable blasphemy against the prophet. The plot was thwarted, arrests were made, and the military was deployed to the piazza. 4 years later, in 2006, the threat emerged again. Another cell was discovered studying blueprints of the basilica, planning to strike the Bologna chapel. Once again, Italian intelligence agencies stopped the attack before it could happen. Since then, the basilica has been locked down. The guards you see outside are not there for pageantry. They are the frontline defense in a centuries-old ideological war that has suddenly been reignited. This brings us to a deeply uncomfortable yet fascinating realization about the nature of art. We have a tendency to domesticate old paintings. We put them in climate-controlled museums, we print them in glossy textbooks, and we treat them as safe, silent, and dead. We look at them to learn about brushstrokes, color theory, and historical dates. But Giovanni da Modena's Inferno refuses to be domesticated. It is a harsh, screaming reminder that art is a manifestation of human belief, and human belief is a terrifyingly powerful force. When Giovanni climbed up on his scaffolding in the early 1400s, mixing his pigments and planning his composition, he wasn't just decorating a room for a wealthy merchant. He was capturing the absolute raw nerve of his era. He was painting the existential dread of a broken church, the visceral terror of physical torture, the arrogant certainty of medieval bigotry, and the desperate human desire to force order onto a chaotic universe. The fact that this painting still generates enough emotion to inspire heavily armed plots of destruction 6 centuries after the paint dried is a profound testament to its power. It bridges a gap across time, proving that the images we create matter. They carry weight. They can be used as theological textbooks, as political hit pieces, and as focal points for holy war. When you stand in the Bologna chapel and look up at that swirling vortex of demons, popes, and prophets, you are not just looking at a window into the past. You are looking at a mirror of humanity. It is a mirror that reflects our endless obsession with justice, our darkest capacities for cruelty, and our eternal, unshakable belief that the things we paint on our walls have the power to shape the world. It is beautiful, it is horrifying, and it is entirely unforgettable.